When the big airline awards come around each year, Singapore Airlines is almost always near the top. Skytrax rated it the second best airline in the world in 2025, behind Qatar Airways. Condé Nast Traveler's readers went one better and voted it the best airline anywhere. Travel Plus Leisure named it the world's best international airline. Add in the wins for its cabin crew, its first class, and its standing across Asia, and you're looking at one of the finest airlines ever to fly. But awards don't fill aircraft. Passengers do. And that's where a strange problem shows up, one that has nothing to do with flying. This is one of the best airlines on Earth, and it's built on one of the smallest home markets any major carrier has ever had. Singapore is a city of just over 6 million people with one big airport and almost no domestic flying. Most large airlines have a whole country feeding passengers into their planes. This one has a city, and not a big one. So how does an airline with almost no home market end up flying the world and staying there for decades? The answer comes down to the network wrapped around that famous cabin. At some point, Singapore Airlines worked out how to sell its passengers far more of the world than it has ever actually flown. To see why that matters, it helps to remember what an airline actually is. At its core, it's a network business, and almost every big one sits on top of a large domestic market. American, United, and Delta have the United States. Lufthansa has Germany and the rest of Europe. China's big carriers have China. All that domestic traffic does something quietly essential. It fills planes, and it pays for the risky long-haul routes. A flight from a hub to the far side of the world only works if you can fill it. And you fill it by gathering passengers from dozens of smaller routes and pouring them into one airport. That's the hub and spoke model, and it's the backbone of the whole industry. The logic, as IATA describes, is simple. Feed lots of small routes into a single hub, and you raise the number of passengers flowing through, which lets you fly bigger planes and spread your costs across more seats. More feed, fuller planes, lower cost per seat. Singapore Airlines has a world-class hub at Changi. The problem is filling it because Singapore has almost no domestic aviation to feed it with. No New York to Los Angeles, no Sydney to Melbourne, no Beijing to Shanghai. There's a city, one main airport, and an airline up against rivals backed by entire countries. So it does something that sounds slightly mad. It imports its passengers. It flies people from everywhere to everywhere, with Singapore sitting in the middle as the connecting point. The industry has a name for an airline like that: a super connector. For most carriers, having no home market would be fatal. Singapore Airlines turned it into the entire business model. That works because of where Singapore sits. It has been a natural stopover between Europe and Australia for as long as the journey has existed. When Qantas first flew Sydney to London in 1947, the trip took 4 days and 7 stops, and one of them was Singapore. The aircraft have changed completely since then. Singapore's place on the map hasn't. Even now, a lot of Europe to Australia traffic still routes through it, and Changi is built precisely for that. Around 3 in every 10 of its passengers aren't ending their journey there at all. They're passing through. Changi is owned outright by the Singapore government. The finance ministry is its sole shareholder, and it's engineered for fast, seamless connections. Last year, it handled more than 70 million passengers, over 10 times Singapore's entire population. Even so, on its own, Singapore Airlines isn't a giant. As of early 2026, it flew 77 destinations. Add its low-cost arm, Scoot, and the group reaches around 130. That's a serious airline, but it's nowhere near global. Now look at Star Alliance, the group Singapore Airlines belongs to, more than 1,100 airports. So the airline flies to 77 cities on its own aircraft and sells access to more than 1,100. That gap is the whole story, and the rest of this video is about how it closed it. So put yourself in Singapore Airlines' position. You want to reach the whole world from a base the size of one city. Really, you've got 3 ways to do it, and the first 2 run into problems fast. The first is to build it all yourself. Put your own planes on every route you want to offer. The trouble here is cost. Flying thin, low-demand routes just for the sake of coverage is one of the fastest ways to lose money. You'd need a huge fleet and very deep pockets, and even then, plenty of those routes would never pay. The second is the move most companies would reach for: buy your way there. Merge with airlines in other countries or take them over until you've stitched together a global network. In aviation, though, that's mostly illegal. And the reason is something most people have never thought about. International flying rights aren't really owned by airlines at all. They're controlled by governments. Under the Chicago Convention, the treaty that built modern aviation, no airline can run a scheduled international service into another country without that country's permission. And that permission comes through thousands of separate deals between governments called air service agreements, almost all of which carry the same old condition. An airline has to be substantially owned and controlled within its own country to keep its rights. So why does that block mergers? Because it forces countries to cap how much of their airlines foreigners can own. The United States limits foreign investors to 25% of the voting shares in a U.S. carrier. The European Union requires its airlines to stay majority-owned and controlled by EU interests. Australia draws the line at 49%. Canada also allows 49%, but stops any single foreign investor, or all foreign airlines combined, from going past 25%. You either keep national ownership and control, or you risk losing the routes that let you fly abroad at all, which means a real cross-border merger is mostly off the table. The moment your airline stops counting as Singaporean or American or Australian, it can start losing the very routes it depends on. You can't buy your way across the map the way a tech company or a car maker can. That leaves the third option, the one you reach when building a global network is too expensive and buying one is illegal. You team up with the airlines that already have what you're missing. So what is an alliance really? At its simplest, it's a way for separate airlines to act a bit like one airline without merging. It runs on a few specific tools. The most basic is interlining, which is just an agreement that lets 2 airlines put their separate flights on one ticket and hand your bags and booking off to each other along the way. One step up is code sharing, where one airline sells a flight under its own code and flight number even though a different airline is flying the plane. You think you've booked Singapore Airlines. On one leg, you might be on someone else entirely. Then there's loyalty, the part passengers feel most. Singapore Airlines runs a frequent flyer program called KrisFlyer, and inside Star Alliance, your KrisFlyer miles work across eligible Star Alliance flights. You earn them on partner airlines, you spend them on partner airlines, and your status comes with you. So, a Singapore Airlines Gold member still gets priority and lounge access while flying Lufthansa or United. Stack those tools together and a small airline can suddenly do something it never could alone. Say you want to get from Singapore to Queenstown, a ski town on New Zealand's South Island. Singapore Airlines doesn't fly there. It will happily sell you the trip anyway. Singapore to Auckland on Singapore Airlines, then Auckland to Queenstown on Air New Zealand, on one booking, usually with your bag checked the whole way. As far as you're concerned, you flew Singapore Airlines to a city it doesn't even serve. Now do that across hundreds of routes, and you can see the real prize. Singapore Airlines gets to offer passengers a whole network it doesn't operate, selling the world while flying a slice of it. A relatively small carrier ends up competing with airlines many times its size by quietly plugging into networks far bigger than anything it could build on its own. So, which network did Singapore Airlines plug into? Star Alliance, the biggest of them all. The alliance was created in May 1997 in Frankfurt by 5 airlines: Lufthansa, United, Air Canada, SAS, and Thai Airways. Singapore Airlines joined 3 years later in April 2000. Its arrival changed the picture. In 1997, Star was a strong alliance with one obvious gap, and that gap was Asia. Thai was its only Asian founder. Singapore Airlines fixed that. One of the most respected carriers in the world, with a major hub sitting right on the Europe to Australia and intra-Asia routes. That handed Star a real foothold in a region where air travel was about to take off. By the numbers, Star is the biggest of the 3 global alliances by members and by reach. 26 airlines, more than 17,500 flights a day, over 1,100 airports, a presence in more than 190 countries. Its rivals are smaller. SkyTeam has around 18 members, oneworld around 16. On the measures that capture reach, members, flights, airports, Star leads. But being on top doesn't mean staying there. Alliances are looser than they look, and members come and go. SAS, one of Star's 5 founders, walked out in 2024 and joined SkyTeam. Asiana is on its way out at the end of 2026, swallowed by a merger with Korean Air. Italy's AIDA only joined in 2026. The lineup keeps shifting under everyone's feet. An alliance gets you reach. What it doesn't hand you is deep revenue sharing. Inside an alliance, partners can link tickets, recognize each other's status, share lounges, and sell seats on each other's flights. But they're still separate businesses, each keeping its own money. When airlines want to go tighter than that, they build a second layer underneath the alliance, the joint venture. A joint venture goes much deeper. With regulators' blessing, 2 airlines can coordinate on a specific market almost as one company, sharing revenue, lining up schedules, even setting prices together on the routes involved. Singapore Airlines has built a web of these. It runs one with Lufthansa across the routes between Singapore, Australia, and Central Europe. It runs another with Air New Zealand between Singapore and New Zealand. And more recently, it added one with All Nippon Airways between Singapore and Japan. Each one turns a loose ally into something close to a business partner on those routes. And then there's the deepest move of all, buying a piece of another airline outright. Singapore Airlines has done this for decades, and it hasn't always paid off. Back in 1999, it spent around £600 million for 49% of Britain's Virgin Atlantic. 13 years later, it sold the whole stake to Delta for about $360 million, barely half what it paid. It also owns Scoot, the low-cost carrier it uses for the cheaper, regional routes that don't fit its premium brand. And for years, it chased the one huge market no alliance could ever unlock for it: India. Why India specifically? Because India shows exactly why ownership can matter more than any partnership. A foreign airline can't simply fly India's domestic routes. So Singapore Airlines went in as a part owner instead, setting up a carrier called Vistara with India's Tata Group. In late 2024, Vistara was folded into Air India, and Singapore Airlines came out the other side owning just over a quarter of the enlarged Air India, 25.1% to be exact. Put it together and you'll see everything clearly. Singapore Airlines never bet on a single tool. It leaned on Star Alliance for breadth, turned to joint ventures when a route mattered enough, and bought equity only where ownership was the one way in. Now, the alliance route isn't the only way to solve the small home market problem. 2 other Gulf airlines tried completely different answers, and the results are a lesson in themselves. Take Emirates. It starts from much the same spot as Singapore Airlines, a small home market, in Dubai, parked in the middle of the world's flight paths. But Emirates went the other way entirely. It joined no alliance at all. Instead, it built everything itself. One of the largest long-haul fleets on the planet, flown out of one giant hub in Dubai, reaching the world under its own name. By early 2026, it was running close to 300 wide-body jets, with hundreds more on order. It worked. But look at what it took: a government owner with deep pockets, a hub growing at breakneck speed, and a city that put aviation at the center of its whole economy. That's the build-it-yourself option from earlier finally pulled off, and almost nowhere else has the money or the appetite to copy it. Then there's Etihad, just next door in Abu Dhabi, which tried a third path. And this one's a cautionary tale. Rather than join an alliance or grow slowly, Etihad went on a buying spree, taking stakes in airlines all over the world, close to 30% of Germany's Air Berlin, half of Italy's Alitalia, a big chunk of India's Jet Airways, plus pieces of Air Serbia, Virgin Australia, and more. The plan was to assemble an instant global network out of other people's airlines. It fell apart. Air Berlin went bankrupt in 2017 once Etihad stopped funding it. Alitalia slid into administration. Jet Airways stopped flying in 2019. In 2016 alone, Etihad reported a loss of close to $1.9 billion, more than $800 million of it from charges tied to those very equity partners, mostly Alitalia and Air Berlin. So line the three up. Emirates built its own network and made it work, but it's a model almost no one can copy because it takes a government and a city willing to bet everything on aviation. Etihad tried to build a network and lost a fortune doing it. Singapore Airlines did neither. It stayed excellent, helped give Star Alliance a real base in Asia, and added joint ventures and equity stakes only where they made sense. Of the three, Singapore Airlines' approach has aged best, and the reason is simple. It's the only one that doesn't depend on bottomless money or perfect luck. It just depends on cooperation. Singapore Airlines is one of the best airlines in the world, but being the best was never going to be enough on its own. Aviation rewards the strongest network as much as the finest cabin, and a city of 6 million can't build that kind of scale alone. So Singapore Airlines built it a different way. It borrowed reach through an alliance, deepened it through joint ventures, and bought into the few markets it couldn't otherwise touch. And the lesson reaches well past one airline. When geography, law, and ownership all stand in your way, the airlines that come out ahead are the ones wired into the strongest networks, the ones that grew by linking up with everyone else. Singapore Airlines bet its whole existence on that single idea, that reach beats ownership. So far, it's been right.